Rain started before Ava's plane even landed. Thick grey clouds swallowed the skyline whole, and by the time the wheels hit the runway, Seattle looked less like a city and more like a memory somebody regretted keeping. Ava pressed her forehead against the cold airplane window and watched water streak sideways across the glass. For some reason, that was the exact moment reality finally hit her. Her mother was dead. Not gone, not passed away, dead. 3 weeks earlier, Ava had still been sitting beside a hospice bed, pretending not to notice how shallow her mother's breathing had become. Now she was flying across the country to live with a man who used to send birthday cards, signed with shaky guilt, and $20 bills tucked inside like apology tips. Her father, Richard Holloway. 10 years ago, he left Phoenix with a suitcase, a vague promise about figuring things out, and a wedding ring he stopped wearing before the divorce papers were even filed. Ava remembered standing in their apartment doorway at 8 years old while her mother washed dishes too aggressively at the sink, pretending not to cry. She remembered asking when Dad was coming home and hearing the silence before the answer. Not tonight. Then eventually, not ever. The plane taxied slowly through sheets of rain. People around her turned their phones on, stretched, complained quietly. Ava stayed still. Her own phone buzzed in her hoodie pocket. Dad. Landed? She stared at the message for a full 5 seconds before typing, yeah. 3 dots appeared immediately. I'm outside. That somehow made it worse. Outside, waiting, acting like fathers were supposed to wait for their daughters at airports after disappearing for a decade. Ava grabbed her backpack and stepped into the aisle with the rest of the passengers. Her legs felt weirdly numb walking through the terminal. Exhaustion, probably. Or grief. Maybe both felt the same after a while. SeaTac smelled like coffee, wet jackets, and expensive perfume. She moved through crowds automatically until the sliding doors opened and cold air slapped her across the face. Rain hammered the pavement outside. And there he was. Richard Holloway leaned against a black SUV under the pickup lane lights, one hand shoved into his coat pocket, scanning faces nervously. Older now, grey at the temples, broader shoulders than she remembered. He looked like somebody who belonged in this city, like he'd grown roots here while her mother slowly disappeared in the desert heat back home. His eyes found hers instantly, and for one strange second, neither of them moved. Ava saw the recognition hit him hard, not because she looked older, because she looked exactly like Lily. Same dark eyes, same mouth, same expression whenever she was trying not to cry in public. Richard inhaled sharply and walked forward. Ava? His voice cracked slightly on the second syllable. That surprised her. Hey. God, awful, awful start. He reached for her awkwardly, hesitated, then hugged her anyway. The embrace felt unfamiliar and too careful, like he was afraid she'd break apart if he held too tight. Ava stood stiffly through the whole thing. Long flight? He asked after pulling back. Not really. You hungry? Kinda. Emily made dinner. Emily. Right. The wife. Ava nodded once. Rain soaked through her sneakers as they loaded her bags into the SUV. The inside smelled like leather and cedar. Warm, quiet, expensive enough to make her instantly aware of every cracked appliance back in their old apartment. Richard started driving while windshield wipers slapped aggressively against the storm. Seattle blurred outside in streaks of neon and wet pavement. He kept trying to make conversation. "Your room's ready." "Okay." "There's a park near the house you might like." "Cool." "Sophie's excited to meet you." Ava glanced sideways. "Sophie?" "Your stepsister." Right. That word still felt fake. Stepsister? Stepbrother? New wife? New family? Like somebody else's life got accidentally printed over hers. Richard gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I know this is weird." Ava looked out the window again. "You think?" He winced slightly. "Good. Let him." The city slowly thinned into quieter streets lined with trees dripping rainwater under yellow streetlights. Then the houses got bigger. Then enormous. Ava sat up straighter without meaning to. "Jesus." Richard laughed quietly. "Yeah." The SUV turned through iron gates. Actual gates. Ava stared openly now as the house appeared through the rain. Massive windows glowing warm against the dark hillside. Modern architecture straight out of rich people magazines. It overlooked black water somewhere beyond the trees. The whole place looked unreal. "You live here?" she asked before she could stop herself. Richard parked slowly. "Yeah. Mum used coupons for cereal." The words slipped out sharp and ugly. Silence filled the car instantly. Richard stared through the windshield for a moment before speaking quietly. "Ava." "Forget it." He nodded once like he deserved worse. Probably did. Inside, the house somehow felt even larger. Warm light spilled across hardwood floors. A fireplace crackled somewhere deeper in the living room. Everything smelled like cinnamon and expensive candles. Ava hated how comforting it felt immediately. Footsteps approached. A woman appeared from the kitchen drying her hands with a towel. Emily. She was prettier than Ava wanted her to be. Early 40s, maybe. Soft blonde hair tied loosely back. Calm eyes. The kind of woman who probably remembered birthdays and bought matching holiday pajamas. Ava instantly distrusted her. "Hi," Emily said gently. "I'm really glad you made it." Ava nodded stiffly. "Thanks." Emily stepped closer carefully, like approaching an injured animal. "You must be exhausted." "Little bit." "We kept dinner warm." Another set of footsteps thundered down the hallway before Ava could answer. "Wait, she's actually here already." A girl appeared around the corner wearing oversized sweatpants and holding a phone charger. 16, maybe. Curly, dark hair, sharp eyebrows. She stopped when she saw Ava. "Oh." Richard cleared his throat awkwardly. "Ava, this is Sophie." Sophie gave a tiny wave. "Hey." "Hey." Then another voice from upstairs. Male. "If somebody touched my leftover pizza, I swear to God." Heavy footsteps pounded down the staircase, and suddenly there he was too. Mason. Tall. Dark hair falling into his eyes. 19, maybe. Built like somebody who played sports but also slept through class regularly. He looked at Ava for exactly 2 seconds before saying, "Damn." Emily shot him a look instantly. Mason. What? She looks like she's about to either cry or commit homicide. Ava blinked once, then unexpectedly snorted. Mason pointed immediately. There it is. Human emotion. Sophie groaned. You're so annoying. And yet deeply lovable. Richard looked exhausted already. Can we maybe survive one evening without chaos? No, Sophie and Mason answered together automatically. Emily sighed like this happened constantly. Ava just stood there awkwardly holding her backpack while these strangers bantered around her like a sitcom family. It should have felt ridiculous. Instead, it made something ache inside her chest. Because their chaos felt easy, familiar, like people who belonged together. Dinner happened around a huge kitchen island under warm, hanging lights. Emily reheated lasagna while Sophie complained about school, and Mason interrupted every story on purpose just to irritate her. Richard mostly stayed quiet, watching Ava carefully every time she spoke, like he was trying to memorize her voice again. Ava answered questions politely but minimally. Yes, Phoenix was hot. No, she didn't know what she wanted to study in college yet. Yes, hospice was awful. The second that word slipped out, silence hit the table hard. Emily looked down immediately. Sophie stopped moving. Mason muttered softly. Shit. Richard's face changed completely. Ava regretted saying it instantly. Not because it wasn't true, because suddenly everyone looked at her like grief itself had walked into the room and sat down beside them. Emily recovered first. You don't have to talk about any of that tonight. Ava picked at her food. I'm fine. Mason leaned back in his chair slowly. That's usually how people announce they're absolutely not fine. Richard shot him a warning look, but Ava surprised herself again by almost smiling. Almost. After dinner, Emily showed Ava upstairs to her room. The hallway overlooked the water through massive windows streaked with rain. The bedroom itself was bigger than their old apartment's living room back home. Fresh sheets, soft lighting, shelves already filled with books somebody had clearly researched based on her age and interests. There was even a framed photo of Arizona desert mountains on the wall. Ava stared at it too long. Emily noticed. I wasn't sure what you'd like, she said carefully, so I just tried to make it feel less unfamiliar. Ava crossed her arms automatically. Defensive instinct. Why are you trying so hard? Emily blinked slightly. Because you lost your mother. You barely know me. Emily looked at her for a quiet second. I know enough. Damn. Ava looked away first. Emily stepped toward the door. There's extra blankets in the closet if you get cold. Seattle nights are different. Yeah. Emily hesitated. Your dad's terrified, by the way. Ava frowned slightly. Of what? Emily gave a sad little smile. You. Then she left. Ava stood alone in the room, listening to rain hammer against the windows. Exhaustion hit her all at once now that nobody was around to watch her hold herself together. She sat on the bed slowly and stared at the desert photo again. Mum should have been here. Mum should have survived. Mum should have gotten another chance to actually live, instead of working herself sick, while some man built a perfect new life across the country. Ava's throat tightened painfully. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She frowned immediately. Another spam message, probably. Then she opened it. Your mother never wanted you in that house. Ava froze. Another text arrived before she could think. Ask Richard what happened the night Lily left Seattle. Her pulse stumbled violently. Lily. Nobody used her mum's first name except old friends. Ava sat perfectly still, staring at the screen while rain rattled the windows harder. Then another message appeared. You think your father abandoned your family. That's not the real story. Cold spread through her stomach. She typed instantly. Who is this? No response. She waited. Nothing. Downstairs, she could hear muffled laughter from Sophie and Mason, arguing about something stupid. A normal family noise. But upstairs, Ava suddenly felt like she'd stepped into the middle of somebody else's unfinished nightmare. She reread the texts slowly. Ask Richard what happened the night Lily left Seattle. Not why, what happened. Which meant there was a story there. A real one. And somehow every person in this house already knew pieces of it, except her. Ava barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her mother sitting silently beside hospital windows during chemo treatments, staring out at nothing while Arizona sunsets burned orange across the sky. What else did Mum hide? By morning, her head hurt. She dragged herself downstairs wearing one of her mother's old hoodies and found the kitchen already alive again. Coffee brewing, music playing softly. Emily slicing strawberries at the counter while Sophie scrolled her phone half-conscious. Mason stood at the fridge drinking orange juice directly from the carton while Richard argued with him about it. Use a glass like a civilized person. Civilization is a social construct. You're disgusting. Mason spotted Ava first. Hey look, Wednesday Addams lives. Sophie snorted coffee through her nose, laughing. Ava rolled her eyes automatically before grabbing a mug. Weirdly, the stupid interaction loosened something tight in her chest. Richard looked relieved just seeing her downstairs. That bothered her too. Everything bothered her lately. Emily slid a plate toward her. Toast? Thanks. They all moved around each other with practiced rhythm, while Ava observed silently. Sophie stole fruit off Emily's cutting board. Mason shoved her away with his hip. Richard checked emails while drinking coffee too fast. Tiny family habits. Tiny familiarities built through years Ava never got. Suddenly she heard herself asking, why did Mom leave Seattle? The kitchen went dead quiet. Even Mason stopped chewing. Richard looked up slowly. What? Ava held his gaze. She never talked about it. Emily turned toward Richard immediately now, watching him. Interesting. Richard set his coffee down carefully, too carefully. Your mother and I had complicated years. That's vague. Some things are painful. Ava shrugged lightly. For who? Sophie looked between them nervously now. Mason leaned against the counter, watching everything with narrowed eyes. Richard rubbed his jaw. Ava. His phone rang suddenly. The timing was almost comical. He glanced at the screen and his entire expression changed. Panic. Tiny but unmistakable. I need to take this. He stepped outside onto the back deck with the phone pressed tightly to his ear. Ava watched through the glass while rain drenched the patio around him. His voice became sharp immediately. Angry. She doesn't know anything yet. Ava's stomach dropped. Yet. Not, she doesn't know anything. Yet. Emily noticed Ava heard it too. Their eyes met briefly. Emily looked away first. Interesting again. Later that afternoon, Ava wandered downtown alone, because staying inside that house felt impossible. Seattle smelled like wet pavement, coffee shops and salt water. Grey sky pressed low over everything. She stopped near the waterfront, watching ferries cut through fog, while tourists huddled under umbrellas nearby. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. You're asking questions now. Ava's heart jumped. Another message arrived immediately. Good. She typed back fast this time. Who are you? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then finally, someone your mother trusted. Ava stared hard at the screen. What happened in Seattle? No answer. Talking to your secret boyfriend? Ava nearly jumped out of her skin. Mason stood beside her holding 2 coffees. Jesus Christ, she snapped. Do you materialize out of nowhere professionally? He handed her 1 coffee casually. Emily sent me to make sure you didn't get kidnapped by fishermen. Ava took the coffee reluctantly. Thanks. Mason studied her face for a second. Okay, what's going on? Nothing? Cool. You're a terrible liar, by the way. Ava looked toward the water again. Did my mum hate my dad? Mason stayed quiet longer than expected. I don't think hate was the problem. Ava looked at him sharply. Meaning? He shrugged awkwardly. There were stories. Nobody talks about it much. Why not? Mason shoved his hands into his jacket pockets. Because every time they do, Dad looks like somebody reopened a bullet wound. Ava went still. That wasn't a casual sentence. Mason noticed immediately and sighed. Forget I said that. Too late. Wind whipped rain sideways across the waterfront. Mason looked genuinely conflicted now. Look, Ava, I know this family probably feels fake to you. A little. Fair. He kicked lightly at the sidewalk. But whatever happened back then, it messed people up, like, permanently. Ava's pulse quickened again. You know something. Not really. That's still something. Mason exhaled hard through his nose. Just be careful digging into old shit around here. Why? He met her eyes, finally. Because I don't think it stayed buried as well as everybody hoped. Before Ava could push further, his phone rang. Sophie apparently forgot her house keys again. Mason groaned dramatically. One day I'm legally abandoning that child. Ava almost smiled. Almost. He pointed at her immediately. See? Tiny emotion. We're making progress. Then he jogged back toward the parking lot, leaving Ava alone again with rain and too many questions. That night, the tension inside the house felt different. Thicker, somehow. Richard barely touched dinner. Emily kept watching him when she thought nobody noticed. Sophie overcompensated by talking non-stop about school drama, while Mason deliberately made dumb jokes, trying to lighten the mood. Then, finally, Emily asked softly, "What happened today?" Richard looked up too fast. "Nothing." Mason snorted quietly. "Dad, your left eye twitches when you lie." "Thank you for that observation." Sophie pointed. "It is twitching." "Can we not do family behavioral analysis at dinner?" Ava stayed silent, studying him. Fear lived under his skin tonight. Real fear. Then, unexpectedly, Richard looked directly at her and said quietly, "Maybe this weekend we should go through some old boxes. Photos. Things your mum left behind here." The room froze. Emily's expression changed instantly. Tiny shift, but Ava saw it. "Why now?" Emily asked carefully. Richard didn't answer immediately. "Because she deserves the truth." Every nerve in Ava's body lit up. Before she could respond, the doorbell rang. Everyone startled. Mason frowned. Who the hell comes over in this weather? Nobody answered. The bell rang again, longer this time. Richard stood slowly from the table, and for the first time since Ava arrived, she saw actual fear on her father's face. Not guilt, not sadness. Fear. Real enough to hollow him out instantly. Ava's stomach turned cold. Whatever happened in Seattle all those years ago, it had just walked up to the front door. The doorbell echoed through the house again, low and sharp against the sound of rain hammering the windows. Nobody moved immediately. Ava looked around the dining room and realized something terrifying in that moment. Everyone here was afraid of whoever stood outside. Even Mason. And Mason looked like the kind of guy who laughed during horror movies. Richard slowly pushed his chair back from the table, his movements too controlled, too deliberate. Emily stood up beside him automatically. "Richard," she said quietly. He held up a hand without taking his eyes off the hallway. "Stay here." Ava's pulse started thudding hard in her throat. The bell rang again, long this time, patient. Whoever it was knew they weren't leaving. Richard walked toward the front door while the rest of them remained frozen around the kitchen island, listening to his footsteps disappear into the hallway. Sophie whispered first. "Okay. Somebody tell me why Dad suddenly looks like he's about to have a stroke." Mason stared toward the hallway without blinking. "Because he knows who's outside." Ava looked at him sharply. "You know too?" "Not exactly." "Mason, I swear." He rubbed a hand over his jaw. "I just know this expression." Emily looked pale now. Richard hasn't looked like this in years. Years. Ava caught that instantly. Then voices drifted faintly from the hallway. Male, low, calm. Richard sounded tense, defensive. Ava stood before anyone could stop her. "Ava," Emily started. Too late. She was already moving down the hallway toward the front entrance. Mason followed immediately under his breath, muttering, "This is such a terrible idea." The front doorway came into view slowly. Richard stood rigid near the open door, while a tall man in a dark raincoat waited calmly on the porch. Mid-50s, maybe. Clean-cut. Expensive watch. The kind of face that looked trustworthy until you paid attention to the eyes. The eyes were wrong. Too empty, too observant. Like he was cataloguing every detail the second he saw it. Then those eyes landed on Ava. "There she is," the man said softly. Richard stepped slightly in front of her automatically. "You need to leave." The man ignored him completely. "Ava Holloway." Ava hated hearing her name from him instantly. "Who are you?" The man smiled politely. "Daniel Mercer." "That means nothing to me." "I was an old colleague of your father's." Richard snapped immediately. "Former colleague." Mercer's smile widened slightly. "Right." Rainwater dripped steadily from the edge of the porch roof between them. Ava noticed Richard's hands were shaking now, tiny tremors. "Why are you here?" she asked carefully. Mercer studied her face for a long second. "You look exactly like your mother." Richard's voice hardened instantly. "Enough." Mercer sighed dramatically. "Relax, Richard. If I wanted trouble, we wouldn't be having this conversation at your front door." That sentence landed like ice water. Ava felt it. So did Mason beside her because his posture shifted immediately. Emily and Sophie appeared behind them now too, silent and tense. Mercer noticed everyone at once. "Beautiful family," he said casually. "Would be a shame to traumatize them tonight." Richard moved forward instantly. "Get out!" Mercer raised both hands slightly. "Easy." His calmness was somehow worse than yelling would have been. "I'm here because old situations are becoming active again." Ava frowned. "What situations?" Mercer looked directly at her. "Your mother kept copies." Silence. Complete silence. Richard closed his eyes briefly like physical pain shot through him. Ava's stomach twisted violently. "Copies of what?" Mercer tilted his head slightly. "You really haven't told her anything." "Leave," Richard repeated quietly. "You don't get to decide that anymore." Mercer reached slowly into his coat pocket, and every muscle in the hallway tightened instantly. Sophie gasped softly. Mason stepped in front of her automatically. But Mercer only pulled out a folded photograph. Old, worn around the edges. He held it out toward Ava. "Your mother took this 3 nights before she disappeared from Seattle." Richard lunged forward suddenly. "Don't!" Too late. Ava already grabbed the photo. Her breath caught immediately. The picture showed her mother standing outside some industrial-looking building at night. Young, terrified, looking over her shoulder directly at the camera. And beside her, Richard. But not the Richard standing in this hallway now. Younger, panicked, blood on his shirt. Ava looked up sharply. "What the hell is this?" Nobody answered immediately. Mercer spoke first. "That was the night 2 employees died inside Blackwater Biotech." Emily whispered. "Oh my God." Sophie looked completely lost now. "Dad?" Richard looked like he couldn't breathe. Ava's voice shook violently. "Mum told me you worked in finance." "I did." "Then why is there blood on your shirt?" Richard stared at the photograph for a long second before answering quietly. "Because one of them died in my arms." Nobody moved. Rain pounded harder outside. Mercer watched the family carefully, like a man studying an experiment. "Your father made mistakes," he said softly, "but not the ones you think." Ava's head spun. "Stop talking in riddles!" Mercer nodded once. "Fair enough." He looked toward Richard. "Should I tell her? Or do you finally want to?" Richard's jaw tightened so hard, Ava thought something might crack. "You destroyed enough lives already." Mercer actually laughed at that. "That's rich coming from you." Mason stepped forward suddenly. "Can somebody explain what Blackwater actually was?" Richard looked exhausted, older than before. "A biotech company contracted through military research divisions." "Military?" Sophie whispered. Mercer corrected calmly. "Unofficially." Emily looked horrified now. "Richard, what did you involve yourself in?" "I didn't know what they were doing at first." "That's always the excuse," Mercer said quietly. Richard snapped toward him instantly. "People died because your division pushed human trials past legal limits." Sophie covered her mouth. Ava stared at her father like she was seeing an entirely different person. Human trials? Richard looked at her helplessly. "Ava, did Mum know?" He hesitated. Wrong move. Ava's chest tightened painfully. "She did." Mercer nodded slightly. "Your mother found internal files accidentally. Participants were disappearing from records." Mason whispered, "Jesus Christ." Ava looked back down at the photo in her hands. Her mother's terrified face suddenly made horrifying sense. "So she ran," Richard answered softly. "She wanted to expose them." "And you didn't?" "I tried to protect you both." Mercer smirked faintly. "By helping bury evidence." "That's not what happened." "Then tell her the truth." Richard looked at Ava finally. Really looked at her. "The night your mother left Seattle, someone broke into our apartment looking for the files she copied." Ava's breathing stopped. "What?" "Your mother thought if we went public immediately, they'd kill us." Emily slowly sat down on the staircase behind them like her legs stopped working. Sophie looked close to tears. Mason stayed completely still beside Ava, jaw tight. Richard continued quietly. "Lily wanted to disappear completely." Ava shook her head slowly. "No. Mum said you abandoned us." Pain flashed across his face instantly. "Because I told her to say that." Silence exploded through the hallway. Ava physically staggered backward one step. "What?" His eyes looked glassy now. "If they thought I still had contact with you, you wouldn't have survived childhood." Ava couldn't process the sentence, couldn't even begin to. Mercer watched her carefully. "Your father stayed in Seattle because somebody needed to keep them focused here." "Them," Ava whispered. Nobody answered quickly enough, which was answer enough. Mercer sighed. Blackwater never fully disappeared after the investigation. The entire house went cold around her. "You're saying people are still involved?" "Money like that never dies cleanly." Richard looked furious now. "Why are you here, really?" Mercer's expression changed slightly for the first time all night, more serious now. "Because somebody accessed archived Blackwater files 2 weeks ago." Ava's pulse jumped instantly. "Who?" Mercer looked directly at her. That's the problem. The access came from Phoenix. Every nerve in Ava's body lit up at once. Phoenix. Her mum's city. Her mum's laptop, maybe. Her mum's belongings. Suddenly she remembered something. 3 nights before her mother died, Ava had caught her awake at nearly 2 in the morning, sitting beside the hospice window with her old laptop open. Ava remembered asking what she was doing. Lily closed the screen too fast and smiled weakly. Just organizing old things. Ava's blood turned to ice. Mercer saw realization hit her face instantly. Exactly. Richard looked at her sharply now. Ava, did your mother leave you anything? Her brain scrambled violently. No, I don't know. But that wasn't entirely true. After the funeral, Ava found a small locked metal box hidden under her mother's bed. She hadn't opened it yet because grief made everything feel impossible. The box was still back in Phoenix, packed inside one of the moving containers scheduled to arrive next week. Suddenly the room felt too small, too hot. You think Mum still had the files? Ava whispered. Mercer nodded once. And if she passed access to you before she died? Richard cursed under his breath immediately. No. Dad? No. Real fear entered his voice now. If they think Ava has those documents... A loud crash suddenly echoed from somewhere outside the house. Everybody jumped violently. Mason spun toward the windows instantly. What was that? Another sound followed. Metallic. Sharp. Like something hitting glass downstairs. Sophie grabbed Emily's arm. Dad? Richard moved immediately now, all hesitation gone. Everyone upstairs. Lock the doors. Mercer looked toward the dark windows. Too late for that. Then the lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed the house instantly. Sophie screamed. Somewhere downstairs, glass shattered, and in the black silence that followed, Ava heard something that made every drop of blood in her body freeze solid. Someone was already inside the house. For one horrible second, nobody moved. The darkness felt alive, thick, suffocating. Ava could hear Sophie breathing too fast somewhere behind her, Emily whispering, "Oh my God," under her breath, Mason swearing quietly near the staircase. Downstairs, another noise echoed through the house. Slow footsteps, deliberate, not hiding anymore. Whoever broke in knew exactly where they were. Richard's voice cut sharply through the dark. Upstairs, now. Dad, Mason started. Move! That tone worked instantly. Sophie grabbed Ava's sleeve blindly and pulled her toward the staircase while Emily fumbled for her phone flashlight. The beam shook violently across the walls, catching fragments of terrified faces as they climbed. Another crash sounded downstairs. Closer now. Ava's pulse slammed so hard she could barely hear over it. Mercer stayed oddly calm behind them. That bothered her more than the intruder. How many? Richard hissed at him while locking the upstairs hallway door behind them. Mercer listened carefully for a second. At least 2. You know them? Probably. Sophie looked seconds away from a panic attack. What is happening? Nobody answered because nobody had time. Richard shoved everyone toward the master bedroom at the end of the hall. Inside! They stumbled in together while Richard locked another door behind them. Rain battered the giant windows overlooking the water. The room glowed faintly from distant lightning flashes outside. Ava's hands shook violently now. This couldn't be real. This couldn't actually be happening. 3 days ago, her biggest problem was planning a funeral. Now strangers were breaking into a billionaire house because of secret biotech files her dead mother maybe left behind. It sounded insane even inside her own head. Another sound downstairs. A drawer slamming open, someone searching. Mercer moved toward the windows carefully. They're looking for storage devices first. Richard rounded on him instantly. You brought them here. No, Mercer snapped quietly. Your daughter did. Silence. Ava felt every eye in the room shift toward her immediately. What? Mercer looked directly at her. If Lily passed access rights before she died, they've been monitoring for activation. Ava's stomach dropped. I didn't activate anything. Then she remembered. Her mother's laptop. 3 nights ago, after the funeral, Ava turned it on, trying to find old photos for the memorial slideshow. A password prompt appeared. She guessed her own birthday. It worked immediately. Oh my God, she whispered. Richard saw the realization hit her face. Ava, what did you open? Nothing. I don't know. Folders, maybe. Mercer closed his eyes briefly. That was enough. Mason stared at Ava. You accidentally activated secret files from a government conspiracy. This is not helping right now, Emily snapped suddenly. It was the first time Ava heard real anger in her voice. Sophie sat curled against the wall, crying silently now, while lightning flickered outside. Richard knelt beside her immediately. Hey, look at me. Sophie shook her head violently. Are we gonna die? The question sucked all oxygen from the room. Richard grabbed her face gently. No, absolutely not. Ava watched him carefully. He sounded convincing, but terrified people can sound convincing too. Downstairs came another heavy crash, then silence. Mercer moved away from the window. They know we're upstairs. Mason muttered, Fantastic. Richard stood abruptly and opened a hidden drawer inside the closet. Ava's eyes widened when he pulled out a handgun. Jesus Christ! Emily looked equally shocked. You said you got rid of that. Richard checked the magazine quickly. I lied. Sophie started crying harder. Mason immediately crossed the room and sat beside her. Hey, Soph, look at me. She couldn't stop shaking. Mason forced a crooked smile somehow. Remember when you accidentally set the microwave on fire? Sophie stared at him through tears. This is your pep talk. I'm improvising under pressure. Despite everything, a tiny, broken laugh escaped her. Mason squeezed her shoulder. Good. Stay with me, okay? Ava watched them and suddenly understood something painful. This family was real. Messy and loud and complicated, but real. And somehow she'd walked into it carrying a disaster none of them deserved. A loud bang exploded downstairs. Everyone flinched violently. Then footsteps on the staircase. Slow, unhurried. Richard raised the gun instantly. Emily whispered, Oh God. The footsteps stopped outside the hallway door. Silence. Then a calm male voice spoke through the wood. Richard. Ava recognized it immediately. Mercer's expression hardened. Cole. The voice continued casually. This really isn't necessary. Richard didn't answer. We only want the archive drive. Ava frowned slightly. Archive drive? Mercer glanced toward her immediately. Your mother copied everything onto an encrypted drive before leaving Seattle. Ava's brain raced. The metal lockbox back in Phoenix. Oh no. Oh no. The voice outside laughed softly. She figured it out. Richard saw it too. Ava, where is it? I think Mum left it in a box. Where? Phoenix. Storage shipment. Mercer cursed quietly. Outside, Cole spoke again. You know what's funny, Richard? This whole thing could have ended years ago if Lily had just handed over the files. Ava snapped suddenly. She died because of you people! Silence outside. Then calmly. No. Cancer killed your mother. That answer somehow sounded crueler. Richard moved closer to the door. If you come through that hallway, I shoot. Cole sighed dramatically. Still pretending you're the hero. I'm trying to protect my family. Your family? Cole laughed softly. Interesting choice of words after abandoning one of them for a decade. Ava physically saw the guilt hit Richard like a knife. Good. But also not good, because now wasn't the time. Mason stood slowly. Okay, maybe we stop emotionally destroying each other while armed psychopaths are outside. Fair point. Emily suddenly looked toward Mercer sharply. You said they only want the drive. Correct. Then why are they here already if it's still in Phoenix? Mercer hesitated. Wrong answer. Ava noticed instantly. What aren't you saying? Mercer rubbed his jaw once. Because the drive isn't the only problem. Richard closed his eyes briefly like he already knew. Tell them. Mercer looked almost annoyed now. Lily also kept names. Ava frowned. Names of who? Executives, researchers, contractors, government officials. Mason muttered, Of course she did. Mercer nodded grimly. Your mother was smart. Ava felt something twist painfully in her chest hearing that. Smart. Brave too, apparently. Braver than anyone ever told her. Outside, Cole knocked lightly against the hallway door, friendly almost. We're losing patience. Richard tightened his grip on the gun. Get out of my house. You know we can't. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the room in cold blue light. Ava looked around, suddenly seeing everyone differently now. Emily terrified but trying to stay calm. Sophie trembling against Mason's shoulder. Mason pretending not to be scared while clearly terrified himself. Richard standing between them and the door with a gun in his hand. And Mercer, watching everything with the strange, detached focus of someone who'd survived this kind of night before. Ava realized something then. The secret destroyed all of them already long before tonight. The fear, the lies, the silence. Her mother ran because there was never a safe ending to this story. A loud crack suddenly split through the hallway door as something heavy slammed against it from outside. Sophie screamed. Another hit. Wood splintered visibly now. "They're coming through," Mason said unnecessarily. Richard looked at Mercer instantly. "Back exit?" Mercer nodded once. "Bathroom balcony." Emily frowned. "That drops into the ravine. Better than staying." Another crash. The door frame cracked. Richard moved fast now. "Everybody move!" Chaos exploded instantly. Mason pulled Sophie up while Emily shoved blankets aside near the balcony doors. Rain whipped violently outside beyond the glass. Ava's heart hammered so hard she thought she'd pass out. Another slam hit the hallway door. "Go!" Richard barked. Mercer opened the balcony. Cold rain and wind burst inside immediately. Mason climbed out first, helping Sophie over the railing toward the narrow emergency staircase attached below. Emily followed shakily. Ava turned back once just as the hallway door finally burst inward. Dark figures flooded through the broken frame. Richard fired immediately. The gunshot exploded deafeningly through the room. Ava screamed instinctively. One intruder dropped. Another ducked behind the wall. Cole stepped through last, calm as ever. "Still dramatic," he muttered. Richard grabbed Ava hard. "Move!" They climbed onto the rain-soaked balcony while gunfire erupted behind them. The emergency staircase shook violently beneath their feet, descending into darkness toward the cliffs below the house. Sophie nearly slipped once, screaming, while Mason caught her arm at the last second. Rain blinded everything. Above them, more shouting echoed from the bedroom. Ava looked back just in time to see Richard still standing in the doorway, holding the gun, while Mercer fought another intruder beside him. Then Richard looked directly at her through the storm. "Run!" Something in his voice shattered her. Because suddenly Ava knew with terrifying certainty this wasn't just about secrets anymore. Her father genuinely believed he might die tonight protecting her. And somehow, after 10 years of hating him, that hurt almost worse than the truth.